Hello. Doing all right? Give or take? Okay, all right. Today we're finishing up our series, Are You Ready? And then if you remember, if you've been here for a couple of those, the initial thought might be, Are you ready? You must be talking about end times. No, I'm talking about 2024. I'm just talking about right now, the stuff that's going to happen and come down the pike this year. We have learned in the Hold My Beer decade that there is no such thing as a safe year. And this year is shaping up to have all kinds of fun times. And as we look at that, the chaos that will be this year, now there's going to be some chaos that's national, cultural, there'll be chaos in individual lives. Some of us are going to hit some real chaotic times. Some of us are in some real chaotic times. And today I'm going to give it to you early, but not right now, the most important lesson you need to have in your arsenal for when the chaos comes, whether it's cultural, whether it's your life. This is the most important lesson to take with you and carry with you as we're getting into the year. Now, if you want to follow along, of course, you can get a bulletin on your way in. If you didn't get that, you can, if you just open our app, you go to the Sunday morning thing, it'll say sermon notes, you can pull it up there. If you're one of those people who likes printed Bibles, which I'm at the age, the electronic stuff was so cool, I just jumped all over electronics, but if you like a printed Bible, what you'll need to do is stick one finger in Psalm 33 and the other in Judges 7. And put a bookmark in one, and because we'll go back and forth during the time, because we're going to be looking at two things, Psalm 33 and Judges 7. In Judges 7, we're going to be looking at a guy named Gideon. And if you don't mind, we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to drop in, and we're not going to give you any background on Gideon. Gideon, by the time we get here, now he has a really cool backstory, and if you want to read his entire life, it's in like Judges 6 through, I think, 9 in that area. But we're just going to hit one piece of his life. And by the time we get to this section, Gideon is in charge of the army. He is the official general for the nation of Israel. And they have a huge problem. By huge, I mean a huge military problem in that the Midianites, an army from, you want to guess where? Yeah, Midian, are invading. And if you looked out over the valley where the Midianites have assembled their armies and the armies they've gotten together, you can't quite count them. There's so many people, it's just like a sea of people. There's so many, it even talks about if you try to just count the camels they brought with them and that they brought their stuff, their trucks, their camels, you couldn't even count the camels. That's how many there are. And Gideon has a big problem to start with because they have uncountable, he has a highly countable 32,000 people. He has 32,000 soldiers. Now, if you military, there are certain battles where 32,000 is too many, but there are certain wars where 32,000 is not going to get you a whole lot done. Okay? And he's in a case where it's can't count them, easily counted them. And then in Judges 7, God comes to Gideon as he's getting ready to go to the battle. And the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. What? You've got too many. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. Now here's where Gideon is hoping for a significant number of dishonest people. Because for almost all of these, this would be their very first or one of their very first battles. They're not battle tested. And it's their very first battle. So do you think any of them would be nervous? Any of them might be scared? So what Gideon is hoping and probably praying for is, God, help the cowards to stick. Help the cowards to stay. Help all the scary guys that are worried to stay. And so he tells them that, and then he watches. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. And Gideon's going, God, that's not really this is my first time being a general, God, but I have some confidence that one of the things we don't want to do is get rid of the army before we start. I think that's, he says, I've not been to war college or anything, but I have some confidence that that's not standard operating procedure, is to send 2/3 of your army away before the battle. But well, let me stop right there. Because this is not our big lesson, but a lesson that you need to understand. It'll come into play as we go. A lot of times we get this idea that if we start living for God, if we start making decisions for God, we start living according to God's principles, when we start doing that, things are going to get easier quickly. And I'm sure Gideon was thinking, I'm doing what God told. God definitely called me. I am doing God's will. We're going to battle. We got my 32,000. I'm sure he thought, well, I'm going to obey and God's going to. No, first thing that happened when he obeyed is 2/3 of his army left. And when you make a decision to follow God, to commit your life to fully obeying his principles and living for God, living for Jesus, life's not going to get better immediately. Matter of fact, an awful lot of the time, it's going to get worse. Because this is basic military strategy. If you have two armies going against each other, and this one does a little blitzkrieg thing and gains this much ground, what does this army then attempt to do? Gain it back immediately while they haven't built up their defense. You don't want to get stable here, because if they get stable here, it's really hard to beat them. The easiest time to beat somebody back is right after they take the land. Because then defenses, they don't have their supply chains built up, so what you want to do is immediately drive them back. Well, when you make an advance for God, when you take steps forward for God, the enemy, the devil, immediately says, I need to take that back. And as soon as you make good decisions for God, the enemy is going to try to push you backwards. And so Gideon is thinking, I'll do things the right way, and as soon as he does, 2/3 of his army leaves. And it's about to get worse. Then the Lord told Gideon, there's still too many. And Gideon's going, can you see over there? There's like so many people I can't count them, and I've got now down to 10,000, and I've got too many. And God gives him a test. There's so many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths on the stream. So basically, he says, okay, now watch as all the people go through, and all the men go down. They're all going to be thirsty. Send them down to the spring. They're going to get water. Now, some of them are going to drop to one knee. They're going to reach in, grab a handful of water, and they're going to drink it. And some of them, I'm not going to act this out because I'm not going to. They get down on all fours and stick their face in the spring and drink. And as that happens, they come and Gideon just goes, okay, you go this way, you go that way, this way, based on how they drank. Only deciding factor, how they drank. And when he gets done, he's like, whew, that could not have gone better. Just before I read it, he's like, because of the people who drank, 9,700 of them picked one of them. And so he's got this group of 9,700 soldiers, which is not that much less than 10,000. And over here, all that went the wrong way, there's only 300 of them. So he's like, okay, that was better. That's better than losing 2/3. I mean, 300, I'm not happy about it, but I can live with losing 300 out of my 10,000. Only 300 men drank with their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in a stream. And the Lord told Gideon, with the 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Excuse me? Pardon me? Did you say the 300? 300. I started out with 30,000. You've been taking away zeros the whole time, God. Okay, you're not taking. This is not subtraction. This is division by 10. We've gone from 30,000 to 300. But God said, send all the others home. And Gideon had a choice right here. Do you trust and obey God in this situation? Or do you go, you know what, God, I was kind of okay with the whole, let's just go with 10,000, but I'm sorry. I'm not telling those guys that. I don't think that obedience is smart. Like I said, I haven't been to war college, but I know 300 people isn't even a roadblock. It's not even a bump in the road to that army down there. We'll be like a bug on a windshield for them. But Gideon collected the provisions, the ram's horns, the warriors, and sent them home. But he kept 300 men with him. Do you think that was hard? I mean, we're used to the Bible stories, and we just read them and go, okay, cool, 300, let's go. Do you think it was hard? How hard was it for Gideon to turn to I mean, 9,700, that's a real group of people. He's got to shout. He's got to speak very loudly for all of them to hear him. How hard was it for him to turn and tell, okay, you guys are dismissed. We're not going to need you in this battle. How hard was that? Wow. I can't even imagine. But here's the lesson that you need to get. This is why we're going to cover it a lot, but I want you to, here's the lesson. When things get really bad, when the chaos hits, when the bad things hit, when all that stuff happens culturally or in your own life, challenging times require a choice. I can either trust God or I can seek control. Because we all like control. Sometimes we joke like, we say, I'm a control freak, like that's weird. That's the only flavor humans come in. We all want to be in control. We all want to know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, in the early part of Genesis, middle of Genesis, there's a place where God tells Abraham to follow me. You need to go west. Just go west. And I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to go west, but if you could, I certainly like if you could give me a Google Maps destination that I could plug into my phone so I know all the turns. Do I want to trust God or do I want control? That's always going to be in your moments of chaos, your moments of distress. That's the decision. Do I grab what I can do or do I trust God? And this is hard. And it doesn't mean things are immediately going to get better. Okay? But in Psalm 33, verse 16, it says, no king is saved by the size of his army, no warrior escapes by his great strength. Which is a pretty good way of putting it. Because for Gideon, was he going to be saved by the size of his army? Was he going to escape by his great strength? No. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through Psalm 33. Because Psalm 33, this is where this is out of. And it's a really good, got a lot of lessons in there on the idea of how it is. And specifically, why we should trust God. Because it's hard to trust God when things are chaotic. It's easy to trust God when things are nice, right? When things you're just going to church in the morning, that's easy to trust God. But when things are hard, we need to know why we're trusting God. So let's get started in Psalm 33. We're just going to read through it and work our way through. It says, sing joyfully to the Lord, you righteous. It is fitting for the upright to praise him. Praise the Lord with the harp. Make music to him on the 10-string lyre. Sing to him a new song. Play skillfully and shout for joy. In other words, step one, worship. Okay? Start out with that. Lift up God. Remind yourself who God is. It's very important. I don't have that as a point, but remember who God is. Worship God. And then he comes back and he says this, for the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. That's awesome stuff, and we're going to come back to that one because I want to use it later, but that's really powerful. But this next section is where I want to start giving you the why we should trust God. Because it says this, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. Now, what am I thinking of right here? What's this remind you of? If you've been around the Bible for a while, what's that remind you of? That's Genesis 1, right? That's creation. God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then he speaks into existence all the different things, or he describes, and things happen, okay? The starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the water of the sea into jars. That's a weird phrase. We'll talk about it in just a second. He puts us deep into storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. So, first thing, why should you trust God? Well, let's start with that weird verse. He gathers the waters of the sea into jars. He puts the deep into storehouses. And for those of us raised in this universe, this time and space, that's just strange. Why are you putting the sea in a jar? That doesn't even make sense. Why are you putting... Okay, here's what you got to understand. We're kind of used to the sea. We go to the beach. We have vacations at the beach. We like the beach. We go on cruises and great big cruise ships. And you know... The sea is something that we have not tamed, but we learn to understand it. Jews, Hebrews, people in that part of the world in general, they did not have that view of the ocean. The ocean was where chaos resided. Matter of fact, the Jews didn't like the ocean so much that they had a little lake in their land, and it was just a normal lake. They called it a sea. They called it the Sea of Galilee. You heard of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee? I looked this up once. If the Sea of Galilee were moved to Minnesota, it would be the 9th largest lake in Minnesota. It's not that impressive. It's just a sea. Now, sometimes the storms get rough, which helps with the whole this is chaos thing, because the storm would come out of the mountains, and it would just, storm would go crazy. You'll see that in the Gospels, where Jesus is out there, and one of those big winds come down and creates all this chaos on the sea. Well, that's what they thought of. The sea is chaos. The sea is uncontrollable chaos. And it's uncontrollable chaos in the Sea of Galilee. What do you think it was like in the Mediterranean Sea? They didn't do cruise ships. They didn't do liners. If they were going to get something off the ocean, they sent somebody else's boat. Because the sea is where chaos lives. But what does God do to the big chaos? He gathers the waters into jars. Can you think of anything more mundane than that? He takes jars, just plain. Is there anything more mundane than a plain old jar? I mean, my mom, we grew up on, you've heard me, I grew up on a farm, and Mom would can things. We get the green beans, or we get the peaches, and we get them up, and Mom would cut them up, and she put them in a jar, and she put the lid on it and put them in a pressure cooker and heat it up, and it would seal, and then we put it down in the storehouse. We put it down in the basement. Because Mom had complete control over green beans and peaches, right? She was the god of green beans and peaches because she had them completely under control. And he says, God takes the chaos around you and cans it and sticks it in the cellar. Why should we trust God? The first thing he lets us know, we should trust God because God brings order in chaos, while we are chaos creators. Isn't that true? We make chaos. Has there ever been a situation where you thought you were going to go in and you were going to fix it, and when you got done, you made it worse? I hear that's how plumbers make their living, right? Because people like me think, oh, I can fix that. And so I go in and I try my stuff, which only does what? I make it so much worse, and by the time the plumber gets there, he's going, cha-ching. Because we can make, matter of fact, some of you made chaos this morning. If you have small children, was there any chaos involved in getting here? Matter of fact, some of you are watching at home today because the chaos just overruled today, right? You just you reached a point of chaos and said, okay, we're just checking it. We're watching online today because the chaos wins. We create chaos. God controls chaos, and he jars it up and sticks it in the cellar. Okay? And he's been doing that since the beginning. If you go back to, we talked about how it looked like Genesis 1. Well, Genesis 1 says, and we don't really see it this way, but I want you to see it this way this time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, we're used to that part. The next part says, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. Formless, chaotic. Empty, lacking structure. And darkness, chaos, covered the deep waters. Chaos. And Genesis 1, among other things, is a picture of God taking the chaos that is in the beginning and organizing it and structuring it and placing boundaries on it and saying the waters will not come farther than this. The chaos is limited. Genesis 1 is about God controlling chaos. Not the only thing it's about, but one of the big things it's about. It's a picture of God creating the chaos that is the universe. And, well, here in Psalm 33, verse 9 said that. He spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood, what? Firm. What's the opposite of water? Firm. Water doesn't come in firm. When I'm old enough to remember water. Anybody remember water beds? You know, where you lay down, get seasick as you're going to sleep, that kind of thing. Firm. It stood firm. So that's the first thing I want you to see. God, we're chaos creators. God brings order out of chaos, and that's why we can trust him. That's his nature, is to bring order out of the chaos. And so we're in chaos. I want to go to the chaos calmer. I want to go to the one who takes the chaos and puts it in jars and throws it in the cellar. Okay? Let's keep reading in Psalm 33. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his own inheritance. So we've got God in complete control right there. Okay? But let's keep reading for now. From heaven, the Lord looks down and sees all mankind. From his dwelling place, he watches all who live on earth. He who forms the hearts of all who considers everything they do. And there's something, God is the one who forms, sees, and understands our hearts. I'm going to make a confession to you. And you're going to think it's weird at first, and you're going to go, oh, me too. We always like to talk about somebody. What's their motivation? Why are they doing that? Do they have good motives or bad motives? You ever have that question? Are they doing this thing because of good motives or out of bad motives? Do you want a confession from Steve? Steve's never done anything in his life, to the best of my knowledge, with perfectly pure motives. My selfishness sneaks in to every decision that I make in some way or another. I would like to say that's not true. I would like to say, oh, Steve, but you do things for God. Yeah, some of those things I do for God, I do because I'm doing them for God, and partially there's a motivation that, you know what, it feels good. Let me give you an example. I'm at a sermon retreat. I'll go on a sermon retreat a couple times a year to plan the sermons out for most of the year, for months at a time. And I'm at this, retreat center down on the coast. And when I do it, I usually do this like in October. And October, it's like empty season for that. That's why I go, because you can go there, and I can have this, I'll be in this huge place, and I'll be like one of only 2 people in the whole place. Well, I'm at this place, and this time, a church's senior group comes. Not senior high school seniors, senior old folks seniors. And they come in for some sort of a retreat of their own. So they're in the building with me, but it's a big building. We're not running into each other. But I go out to my car to get something, and it's just getting dark, and I look, and they, of course, the only way a church is allowed to travel is in a van, right? So they've got that white 12-passenger van, and they've got that parked in the parking lot. It's got their name on the side. We don't have a name on our side of our van because have you seen Berry Drive? So they've got their white van sitting there, and the headlights are on. And they're all, it's dark. They're in for the night. Okay, they're not coming back out. And so I'm like, oh, they could be in trouble. Tomorrow morning the van will be, battery will be dead. So I walk over and check, and sure, it's unlocked. So I unlock the door and reach in, and yes, I got the pull-out thing, and I just turn the lights out, and I close the door. And then I look around. Anybody see me? I just did something really good. I just saved them from, having to jump their vehicle in the morning. Did anybody watch me? Nobody saw me. I really, really, really wanted to go in and walk past one of them and say, hey, you left your lights on, but don't worry, I got it for you. So I could get just a little bit of glory out of it. You know what I'm saying? Somebody'd say, good job, Steve. Don't we all live a little bit for that? We do the good thing. We sure want to make sure somebody notices. When Jesus says, when you're giving, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Yeah, I'm not going to tell the other hand, but I'm going to tell everybody else. Because I sure want some credit for this. I want points when I do something good. And I think all of us, most of the time, fall into that whole thing of even if we choose not to, we kind of hope somebody finds out when we did something good. Our motives are always mixed and messed up. And God considers the heart so he knows it. And here's the next reason. See, God sees the big picture. He is above everything. And he understands our motives better than we do. See, when you get in chaos, when you get in a tough situation, you can start rationalizing almost anything. That's one way I used to define an adult. There are 2 definitions of an adult. One is an adult is someone who wants to take a nap. Okay? And until you want to take a nap, you're not really a grown-up yet. Okay? All right? And the second one is adults can rationalize almost anything. You tell a kid, don't do that, it's wrong, and the kid will go, okay. They may still do it, but they know it's wrong. Right? You don't catch a kid getting in the cookies, and you told them not to get in the cookies, and they go, oh, you don't understand. I felt my sugar was getting a little low. And I just felt I didn't want to bother you with this problem that I'm going through right now, so I thought I would just get the cookie myself. Right? Kids don't do that. Kids go, I'm sorry, or They may react worse, but they know they did wrong. Grown-ups are the ones who rationalize it and say, no, that was the right decision. And the problem we run into as adults is we get into chaotic situations and we start rationalizing our behavior. We're running a business, time to do the taxes. We realize there's some stuff that didn't go the way it was supposed to go. We look at the bottom line, and oh my goodness, I really don't want to pay the government that much money. You know, I think God would be okay if I went back to line 43 and change that one number just a little bit. Nobody will ever know. We can rationalize. We can convince ourselves that's good. And see, people look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. He's busy looking at your motivation. And let me throw you this. I've been wanting to use this quote for a while. Today's going to be the day. G.K. Chesterton said, moral issues are always terribly complex for someone without principles. And here's something you need to do, because you're going to see this year. When it comes to politics, you're going to see this year, okay? God's principles are normally simple, okay? God's principles are for us. We're not that bright, so he makes the principles easy. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the first and greatest commandment. Anybody not get that? You may go, I don't understand. I'm supposed to what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You guys got it, right? How easy is that to pull off? Oh, yeah. They're simple. Applying them's complicated. All right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Any issues with how to understand what that says? What's the principle? Love my neighbor as I like myself. Any complications? Any challenges in understanding that? No. How about applying it? Well, have you met my neighbors? Yeah. And what I'm getting psychic for you. I'm gonna practice my ESPN, and I'm gonna tell you, this year there are people who are going to try to twist the principles and forget the principles. Say, well, it doesn't matter if you mess up line 43 in your tax return. That's okay, as long as you get where we want. And the solution that I have is incredibly simple. This is all we got to do. And if you look at it, what you'll recognize is they're saying, I want to get from here to there. That my goal is whatever this thing is I probably want to solve. And they say, I know there's a straight path. Do God's will. Do God's will. Follow God's principles. But that's real. The principles are complicated. What we should do instead is, instead of going straight in God's principles, we're just going to deviate a little bit from God's principles. We're just going to take a little detour from God's principles, just a little detour and a little detour and a little detour. Aren't you glad you're not the camera operator? And a little detour and a little detour. And you never actually get to God's solution because you didn't follow God's principles. So we want to compromise, and we want to rationalize it into saying the compromise of the principles was the right way to go. But God's principles are simple. Applying them is where the complications come in. Does that make sense? Matter of fact, here's how Jesus put it. Remember this year. This could be your verse of the year. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, which is what we do naturally, right? But I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Now, the first week of the series, in case you remember that, we talked about the fact that we are adopted by God. We are heirs. We are the children of our Father in heaven. And we're supposed to live that way. Remember that? First week. And how do people who are children of God live? We love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Now, I can guarantee you will hear people this year telling you you're supposed to hate your enemies. You're supposed to fight them, and you can fight dirty. It's okay to fight dirty against your enemies as long as you're going for the right goal. You don't get to the right place with God following the wrong path. And as soon as you hear somebody, anybody, and you're going to hear it, telling you to hate your enemies, you know they're not speaking for God at that moment. Because God will never tell you something that's at odds with His words and what Jesus taught us, and what Jesus teaches insanely clearly is to love your enemies. And as soon as the person says, hate your enemies, turn them off. they're wrong. They're telling you to go away from God's path and God's standard. And it doesn't matter if their goal is noble. Their method of reaching the goal is not biblical. It's not godly. That make sense? Okay, that was free. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's go to that. I skipped 2 verses because I wanted to come back to. I want you to see these 2 verses right now. Psalm 33, verses 4 and 5. It said, "For the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love." Now look at the words that describe his character. There's a handful of them. Let me change this really fast to white and bigger. The word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. What does that tell me about God's character? That, right? I mean, right, true, faithful, loves righteousness, loves justice, and has unfailing love. That's as good as it gets. Now, what's my character? Well, I do some things that are right and true. I'm faithful sometimes. I like righteousness and justice, and I have, right, failing love, faltering love. Am I wrong? This is who God is. This is who we are. Well, that gets me to the next point, because God has the character to do what's best. God's character always points to what is absolutely best, both for us and for him and for the environment and the people around us, for everything. God's character is always right, okay? But not only does he have the character to do what's best, he has the power to accomplish his plans. He has the power to accomplish his plans. He's not impotent. He can pull off what he needs to pull off. A couple verses we saw earlier. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. The word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. Okay? Where am I getting that? The plans of the Lord stand firm forever. The purposes of his heart through all generations. And let's keep reading back into Psalm 33. Go to verse 16. This is where we started. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save. But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, on those whose hope is in his unfailing love, to deliver them from death and keep them from alive in famine. Now, one of those verses, like I said, sometimes when a psalmist or in the Bible is talking, they'll say something that doesn't fit in our world very well, and so we don't really get it. And that was verse 17. Verse 17 said, "A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite its great strength, it cannot save." Now, for us, how many of you ever depended on horses? It's like the horse was my only hope was my horse. My horse got me through the problem. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name, that kind of thing. No. For us, a horse is never a hope of deliverance. We had somebody in the first service who does rodeos and somebody in this service who has horses, and I understand that. But hardly ever are you going to say a horse is a vain hope for deliverance. We have other things that are hope for deliverance, aren't they? How about, let's just put a couple up here. Steve, you went and got personal. Now you're meddling. You went from a nice little sermon, and now you're meddling into my life. Money is a vain hope for deliverance. Now, for those people, a horse was a big deal. For us, money. If I can just have enough power, if I can have enough control. If my team can just get enough power, can just get enough control. If we could just take over, we could do things right. Possessions, you can think of a few others, right? The things you depend on. Vain hope for deliverance. I thought of one. This is one that we rationally know won't work, but I think people get caught up in it because they're in an addicted situation, and there might be some sort of a drug or alcohol, and we think that's our hope for deliverance. If we can just get that, that'll deliver me from my problem. No. All those things, and you can think of more probably, they're all vain hopes for deliverance. They cannot save us. See, Jesus does the saving thing. That's Jesus' job, not our job, okay? And so we come in to do all these things, all these ideas, and they don't work. We should probably check back in on Gideon, don't you think? We kind of left him all alone with his 300 men and a whole bunch of torches and trumpets and stuff. So let's get back to there. Gideon's working. And so Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 groups of 100 each, because 3 groups of 100 is a much better strategy than 300 men all going at once to get killed, right? If there's 3 groups of 100, at least they can wipe out this one, the third group might survive. Not really, but hey. So he divided them into three groups, gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch on it. Now this is where there's a lot of stuff people don't recognize this about this specific passage, is that Gideon's army did have one special ability, special trait. They all had 3 hands. Because they had one hand to hold the ram's horn. They had one hand with a clay jar with a torch on it. Now, think about what that is. That's a torch with a clay jar sitting on top of it. The torch is lit. You put the clay jar on top of it. It kind of it dampens the fire, but it doesn't go completely out. So if you take the jar off or break the jar, you're going to get a sudden flash of light. Okay, so one hand they held their torch. One hand they held their trumpet. And their third hand they held their sword. Because what kind of an idiot would go into battle unarmed? Right? There's no way you're going. Okay, they only had 2 arms, and they only had 2 hands, and they had a ram's horn in one hand, and they had a torch with a jar on top of it in the other hand, and they had their sword in their holster. That's a fascinating battle strategy, don't you think? Do you think if Gideon had gone to West Point or War College, they'd have taught him this one? It's really crucial when you go into battle that you make sure that your rifle is on your back, so your hands are free to hold a torch and a trumpet. So my guys, Gideon's got his guys. He's got his 300 men against a number he can't even count, and they've got a torch in one hand and a trumpet in the other hand. So I'm guessing their strategy will be somewhat stealthy, right? Because if you're outnumbered, if you're drastically outnumbered, I am pretty sure your number one object lesson is to try. You're going to go in really quiet. You're going to sneak around the corner. You're going to take 2 guys out here. Go over here and take 7 guys out here. And just sort of work your way down, right? You're going to just under the radar, right? That's how I think would be if I had 300 men and I'm trying to take out a huge number. I'm not going to make everybody know. I'm not going to announce my location. I'm saying I'm not going to tell them where I am. The first thing I'm going to do is just go stealth mode. So let's see I'm sure it's what he does. It was just after midnight, after the change in the guard, then all 3 groups blew their horns and broke their jars. So the 300 unarmed men said, "We're over here. Bring bright light. Over here." That way the battle will be over quicker. They get killed faster. It'd be much more merciful than them actually trying anything else. They held the blazing torches in their left hands, the horns in their right hands, with their swords in their belts, and they yelled, "We're over here, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Did any of you guys who've studied battle strategy, did it ever come up the flash a light, blow a horn, and tell your enemy where you're at when you're drastic? Anybody cover that in your strategies? If you go to War College, I'd say write a paper on this. I think that'd be a great paper. What in the world? How hard do you think that was? How hard was it, do you think, for Gideon not to go, "Okay, God, I've been with you so far, following along, doing what you told me to do. I went from 30,000 to 10,000. Got it. Went from 10,000 to 300. Got it. But God, you cannot expect me to go into battle with my soldiers unarmed." But he did what he was told. And each of his men stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed around in a panic. See, what happened was The Midianites, well, number one, God's working. And number two, if you look and you see 300 torches, you're logically going to say, how many people have torches? A very small percentage of your people are carrying torches. Just a minuscule number have torches. How many are blowing trumpets? Oh, hardly anybody has a trumpet. 1% maybe, probably half of 1% have trumpets. Probably half of 1% have torches. Everybody else has what? A sword. So how many Israelites are there? Oh my goodness, there's coming there. And then God just goes, let me stir some crazy in here. Just a little, let me dose of panic. Boom. Rushed around in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Oh, there's the swords we needed. They didn't need the swords in their belts because all the enemy people had swords they were perfectly willing to use on each other. Wow. And those who were not killed fled. Now, you knew that was going to happen because I wasn't going to tell you a story about him getting annihilated. But here's the thing. Trusting God doesn't mean we don't do anything. Sometimes we get this idea that if we're going to trust God, we just lay back. Okay, God, do your stuff. No, He gives us plans. He gives us principles. He gives us ways to live. But our actions have to reflect Him in everything. We can't say, I'm going to trust you part way. Well, what would have happened? What would have happened now that we know the full strategy, know exactly what God was doing? God was working on panic. God uses that strategy in the Old Testament once in a while. He's working on a panic strategy. His goal is, I'm going to make all these people panic. What happens if Gideon says, okay, I want everybody to choose, either have a trumpet or a torch in your left hand, and I want your sword in your right hand? What would have happened? There wouldn't have been enough light and enough noise to create the panic. God picked 300 people because 300 trumpets and 300 lights was how many He needed with what He was going to do as far as stirring in panic to create a rout. It doesn't say this in the Bible, but I'm almost 100% sure if Gideon had chosen to say, okay, everybody get your sword out and pick either a trumpet or a torch, they would have gotten crushed like a bug on a windshield because it wouldn't have been what God wanted done. And Gideon chose between control and trusting God, and he chose to trust God. And God got a spectacular victory. And if we go back to Psalm 33, let's see how that psalm finishes up. We wait and hope for the Lord. Is there anything harder than waiting? Not for me. We wait and hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Help, shield. In Him our hearts rejoice. Remember that worship? We started with worship. Started the first two verses of that psalm were about worship. In Him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in His holy name. In a prayer, may your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you. Some of you might want to take that verse and memorize that verse and make it part of your prayer life. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you. Because here's the real deal. If I've got a God who speaks things into existence, if I've got a God who takes the chaotic seas and cans them and puts them in His cellar, there is no conceivable situation, Oswald Sanders says, in which it's not safe to trust God. Not always easy. Matter of fact, usually not easy. Not always the smoothest path, not guaranteeing things aren't going to go wrong in any way, shape, or form, but the smoothest path and the best choice is always to trust God. There's no conceivable situation in which it is not safe to trust God. And now we go back to the beginning. Because challenging times require a choice. Do we trust God or do we seek control? And as we go through this year, culturally there are going to be times when you want to seek control because you feel a little chaotic. There are going to be times for a lot of us where there's going to be a period where we're going to hit some chaos. I just finished a class in my schooling, and the professor looked like a perfectly healthy middle-aged man, probably mid-60s. And like a week later, something wasn't right. He went in, and I'm talking, I was in class the second week of January. So that's how long ago this was, 2 weeks ago. He went in, they did some exploratory stuff. They found 3 or 4 malignant tumors in his brain. They've since gone in to get another one out. He's got stage 4 cancer. He didn't know that chaos was coming. And all of us, at some point in our life, are going to face some chaos. Not necessarily at that level, but you're going to face chaos. You're going to face chaos this year. Some of you are already living in the chaos. Some of you are already in that crazy. And this isn't a one-time decision to trust God or seek control. How many times did Gideon have to choose to trust God? When God said, make the announcement that anybody that's scared can go home, Gideon had to make a choice. Do I trust God, or am I going to seek control? When God says, divide them up into a group of 300 and a group of 9,700, Gideon had to make a choice. Do I speak what God said, or do I just send the 300 home and move on? When God said, take the 300 and give them each a trumpet and a torch and put their swords in their belts, Gideon had a choice. Do I trust God, or do I seek control? It's always a series of choices. It's not one choice and you're done. Each step of the way is a new choice. Do I trust God, or am I going to try to control this? And all of us face this a lot. We face it in the big things, and we face it in the small things. Am I going to trust God, or am I going to seek control? And today, we'll get ready to do another song in just a minute. And during this song, I want you to, for some of you, you know what your chaos is. You know what the area is. I've been talking, and the entire time you've only thought about one thing. You know where your chaos is at. If that's the case, during this next song, I want you to be committing yourself, just reminding yourself, okay, what's my next decision? How do I trust God in that decision? Some of you, and I hate to say this, but it's true, some of you don't know that there's chaos coming. And God wants you to make the call before the chaos comes, that you're going to trust God in it. Life might, like I've said many, many times, there's only 3 states of humanity. You're in trouble, you just got out of trouble, or if you're Southern, you're fixing to get into trouble. That's the only 3 states. So know that that's what's in your life. Make the decision right now, during this next song, that I'm going to make the choices that are about trust. I'm going to trust God. I'm not going to try to gain control. I'm going to do what He says. I'm going to live by His principles. And during the next song, you may say, you know what, I want to go over and pray at the cross over there, and I want to just pour that out to God. I'm just going to lay it out to God and say, God, I know this is hard, this is difficult, but I'm going to choose to trust you as best I can in the situation. You may want to take communion, one of the 2 communion stations, just to remind yourself that God's in control, that He loves you, that Jesus died for you. During the first service, I was watching a young woman, and as I was preaching, I could tell there was something stirring. Some of you guys are not good liars with your faces. I know what's going on in your heads. And I knew something was bugging her a little bit. And about halfway through the song, probably more than halfway, she got up and we took communion. And I just happened to run into her in the hallway. And I said, hey, you okay? And she told me what was going on in her life and how big a deal it was for her to get up and let everybody watch her walk over there and take communion and come back. She said it was a big thing, but she felt like she needed to make that statement to herself and to remind herself. She came over, took communion, came back, and sat down. You may need to do that. You may need to go pray. Whatever God's working in your life, you may need to make that step of faith. To say, God, I'm going to trust you today. Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the example of Gideon. Thank you that trusting, even though it never gets easy, it's always the right choice. So today, I pray that I will trust you. Lord, when the chaos is here, when the chaos is coming, help me to trust you in it. Help me to act out of trust and out of faith. And I pray that you be glorified through my life. In Jesus' name I pray.